February 21st, 1943, North Africa, Tunisia. The desert night wind still bites like a razor against the skin. The air hangs heavy, saturated with a unique, suffocating cocktail of smell. It reeks of diesel exhaust, burnt rubber, and the stale, metallic scent of old sweat. It is the smell of war. Erwin Rommel, the field marshal whom the entire Allied world whispers about in fear and awe as the desert fox, stands in a concealed depression. He is positioned 20 miles east of Tebessa. His leather jackboots crunch softly against the cold, brittle gravel. His gloved hands grip his signature's ice binoculars, knuckles white. In his deep set eyes, there is a flicker. It is that distinct glint of a hunter who has just spotted wounded prey. It is a look of cold, calculating excitement. Behind him, a massive war machine is shaking off its slumber. The steel beasts of the German 10th Panzer Division and the Italians are growling. The vibration of hundreds of engines warming up travels through the ground, vibrating up through the soles of Rommel's boots. It is an intoxicating sensation of raw power. Hundreds of black cannon barrels glint faintly under the starlight, all pointing west. Rommel is certain, absolutely certain, that when the sun rises in a few hours, this valley will witness a perfect slaughter. This isn't just intuition. It is a cold calculation based on the brutal facts he has witnessed over the past few days. In his eyes, the American forces blocking his path are not a real army. They are essentially just civilians in uniform. They are essentially a mob, armed to the teeth with surplus industrial goods, but devoid of a true warrior's soul. They are cowards who crumble under the slightest pressure. The intelligence reports sitting on his desk are scathing. The reports say enemy command is chaotic, tactical proficiency is abysmal, and they are subject to mass panic when flanked. Rommel has already played out the victory in his mind. He vividly sees the American lines tearing apart like vapor. He sees thousands of American soldiers raising their hands in surrender. He sees tons of fuel falling right into his lap. He is likely already drafting the triumphant telegram to Berlin. However, the tactical genius is making a grave mistake. Fatal misjudgments often occur at the peak of confidence. Rommel cannot possibly imagine the truth in this darkness. Across the valley he views as an open road, the Grim Reaper has quietly switched sides deep within the darkness. He is not about to crash into the terrified Boy Scouts of 3 days ago. He is about to slam into a wall of iron. He will face a wall intellect and vengeful fury. This day, February 21st, marks the beginning of the end. This day will mark the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany in North Africa. Rommel is about to discover horror. His opponent possesses a weapon far more terrifying than any Tiger tanker capacity to learn, evolve, and to kill. To understand why Rommel is so arrogant this morning, we must turn the clock back 7 days to the tragic massacre. We need to look at the tragedy known as the Valentine's Day Massacre, and we need to smell the sickening burning steel. It was February 14, 1943, City WWII. For the U.S. 1st Armored Division, this was pure hell. The American G's back then were green. They had brand new M for Sherman tanks and pockets stuffed with gum and chocolate. Their heads were filled with obsolete fantasies of war. They imagined combat as a medieval joust or a rough game. They thought tanks were meant to charge across open fields and duel enemy tanks, just like in the Hollywood movies. The Germans used their 88mm anti-minus aircraft guns and battle-minus hardened troops to blast those fantasies. When the battle started, the American deployment was a disaster. Their infantry was marooned on isolated hilltops. They were separated like islands in an ocean, unable to support each other, watching helplessly as they were encircled. And their tank units. Those young crews received orders that were tantamount to a death sentence charge into the valley. They were ordered to charge into the exposed valley floor to hunt German tanks. The Germans acted like a patient wolf pack. They didn't rush. They used storm miners like artillery and screaming Stuka bombers to sever American communication. Then they wove a web of death with anti-minus tank guns. The American tanks rolled arrogantly into this killing ball. The catastrophe began. If you were lucky, or perhaps unlucky enough to be there, you would have heard a specific sound. You would have heard a sound that sets teeth on edge the high minus pitched shriek of an 88mm shell, followed instantly by the sledgehammer crack of metal striking metal. One by one, the Shermans were punched through. The Sherman tank had a grim nickname at the time, the Ronson. It was named after the famous cigarette lighter. This was because of its gasoline engine and full ammunition storage. The slogan was "Lights first time every time." The battlefield instantly turned into an inferno. The moment a shell penetrated, the interior temperature would spike. This ignited the fuel and propellant instantly. Within seconds, geysers of violent flame would erupt from the hatches. The crew trapped inside didn't even have time to scream before they were incinerated. It was a horrifying instant end. Some survivors leapt out engulfed in flames, rolling in the sand, trying to extinguish the burning oil fused to their skin. The air was thick with the acrid stench of roasting meat and burning hair. The radio channels were clogged with screams. In just 4 hours, Combat Command Day of the 1st Armored Division was crippled. The command system completely collapsed. No one knew who was in charge. No one knew where to run. But the nightmare did not end there. 2 days later, at the Battle of Tebessa, chaos escalated into a rout. Major General Orlando Ward, a veteran of the First World War. He tried to use his outdated experience to stop Rommel, but he was facing a modern blitzkrieg. The German panzer groups moved like sharks. They were tearing through the fragile American lines. The scene that followed was a complete humiliation for every American officer. Thousands of vehicles clogged the roads retreating west. Trucks, jeeps, and artillery tractors were jammed bumper to bumper. The Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt dived on them like it was target practice, turning the traffic jam into a chain of fireballs. Panic spread like a plague. Drivers abandoned their vehicles with engines still idling and ran blindly into the open desert. Soldiers threw away their rifles and heavy packs, desperate to run just a little faster than the man running next to them. Officers ripped off their rank insignia, terrified of being picked off by snipers. In that moment, this unit had lost its soul. It was no longer an army. It was a herd of terrified animals driven by fear. Rommel stood on the high ground, watching it all. He saw an undisciplined force that broke at the first sign of trouble. In his eyes, the Americans might be able to build good trucks. In his eyes, they were not true warriors. This deep contempt became the solid foundation of his plan to attack Tebessa. But what Rommel couldn't know was that amidst this chaotic collapse, in the grey fog of despair, a seed of hope was planted. During the frantic retreat to Kasserine Pass and Tebessa, a critical and quiet transfer of command had taken place. A brigadier general named Paul Robinette took control of Combat Command B. He was a man who would change everything. If you saw Robinette, you would never associate him with General Patton, who waved pearl-handled revolvers and cursed. Robinette was short and plain-looking, resembling a high school math teacher or an accountant with a degree in agriculture. He was not a commander who rallied troops with speeches. He was a cold tactician who fought with calculus and logic. While others froze in chaos, Robinette drove his jeep into the biting wind, personally surveying every inch of the terrain. His brain worked like a scanner, converting the valley and ridge lines into data, fields of fire, and defensive grids. He chose the Beherit Faust and Abe Valley as his ambush point. At first glance, it looks like a wide, flat valley floor. A mediocre commander might have simply dug trenches in the valley floor or lined up tanks in a straight, predictable row. But Robinette noticed the deceptive waters, the dry riverbeds, and the low ridges that were lining the valley edges. He made a stunning decision, one that violated every single American tactical doctrine of the time: hide the tanks. That was his order. Not in the rear, but inside these watersome depressions. He ordered every tank driver to drive. They drove their vehicles into the hollows until the hull was completely obscured, leaving only the turret exposed. Leaving only the turret and the black muzzle of the gun exposed. This is the defensive tactic known as hold down. This meant that to the German eye, the American tanks were effectively invisible. Even if spotted, they were safe. The Germans could only target the low, thick, angled turret, while the vulnerable tracks were safely swaddled by earth. But this was just the first layer of Robinette's trap. He knew that tanks alone would not stop Rommel. He needed more. He deployed his infantry like steel nails along the ridgelines on the flanks. Their job was not to be cannon fodder. Their job was to use heavy machine guns to strip away the German infantry support. He was going to completely blind the panzers. The most lethal component of this death trap, however, was the artillery. Robinette concentrated 11 full artillery batteries. He gathered over 60 heavy guns, including the massive 105mm howitzers. He kept them all together. He forged them into a single, terrifying iron fist. On the sleepless night of February 20th, they prepared the maps. They assigned a number to every rock, every path, and every intersection. This was a sophisticated pre-minus registered fire grid. Forward observers didn't need to calculate complex ballistics in battle. They just had to scream a number into the radio. Concentration for 01. Seconds later, dozens of guns would fire simultaneously, bringing tons of high explosives down. They would hit that single point at the exact same moment. It was the birth of the devastating time on target artillery tactics. That rainy, freezing night, Robinette gathered his officers. Under the dim light, his face was as hard as granite. He didn't yell for the country. He just pointed at the map, confirming your tank is here. Your field of fire is here. Trust your flanks. Trust the artillery. We fight as one. That night, American soldiers shivered inside their cold steel shell. They were listening to the distant clanking of German racks getting closer. It was the sound of death approaching them. The fear was still there, but this time, mixed with the fear, was a new, cold discipline that held them together. Time returns to the morning of February 21st. The mist begins to burn off under the rising sun. Visibility improves. Rommel's army launches its assault. 40 tanks of the 10th Panzer Division lead the charge, followed closely by trucks. They are packed with Italian infantry. They move in perfect combat formation, rolling into the Bahir et Faust in a valley. They roll into the valley with the confidence of a military parade. German tank commanders pop out of their hatches. They are scanning for targets. They expect to see what they always see: American tanks scrambling in panic across the ground. They expect to see infantry throwing away their helmets, but the valley is silent, dead silent. There are no fleeing trucks. There is no chaotic radio chatter when the German vanguard pushes to within 1,500 yards of the American lines. In an instant, the seemingly empty ground on the sides of the valley erupts. The hidden Shermans and tank destroyers fire in unison. 75mm armor-piercing shells tear through the air. The Germans are completely stunned by the sudden ambush. They frantically rotate their turrets, searching for the enemy, but in despair, they find nothing. There is no silhouette to target. They see only puffs of blue smoke rising from the ground. The Germans fire back, but their shells explode harmlessly in the dirt. Their shells skip off the low-profile turrets, but the American shells are drilling precisely into the exposed German hull. Then the horror truly begins. On the ridge, an American observer presses the top button and coldly recites a coordinate code. Miles to the rear, the earth shakes violently. 60 guns roar as one. This is not sporadic shelling. This is an absolute storm. Seconds later, the sky falls. A curtain of black explosives descends on the center of the German formation. The explosions merge into a continuous roar. The trucks carrying the Italian infantry are instantly reduced to splinters and twisted metal. Soldiers preparing to dismount are erased from existence by a blanket of fire before they can even unshoulder their rifles. Stripped of their infantry cover, the German tanks are suddenly blind. They try to flank, but the ridges light up with an T-10 fire. They try to push through the center, but they run into a wall of crossfire. Rommel, watching from the command post, snaps the pencil. Impossible, he mutters. These cannot be the Americans. He refuses to believe it. It must be a fluke. The commanders are too cautious. Rommel's gambler instinct takes over. He orders to commit the reserves. Bring up every gun we have. Stuka support, breakthrough now. The battle rages into the next day, February 22nd. The intensity doesn't fade. It reaches white-hot levels of destruction. The Germans launch desperate charges, trying to drown the Americans in numbers. The 88s roar and the Stukas scream above. But the American line is like a reef in a storm. Scarred, battered, but immovable. Every time the Germans try to mass for an attack. That surgical American artillery falls, turning the assembly area into a slaughterhouse. Every tank that tries to advance is met by fire. They are met by hidden Shermans firing from cross angles, hammering the tank until it is scrap metal. It is a brutal display of power. By that bloody afternoon, the valley is littered with burning wrecks. Black smoke chokes the sky. It is a graveyard of bodies and steel. In front of the American positions, the 10th Panzer Division has left behind a silent graveyard of bodies and twisted steel. It is a massacre, but this time it is the Germans being butchered, for in the afternoon. Rommel puts down the combat report. His face is pale, the heavy exhaustion of admitting defeat washing over him. As an experienced commander, he reads the field. To the south, Montgomery and the British 8th Army are closing in, if he keeps smashing his head against this wall of iron. His entire Afrika Corps will be bled dry right here by these Americans who have suddenly woken up from their long slumber. All units, withdraw to Kasserine Pass. Rommel gives the order. His voice is dry, filled with bitterness and resignation. In this battle, the Americans paid a heavy price, over 6,000 casualties and prisoners during the Kasserine campaign, and 183 tanks lost. But this was no longer a rout. It was a victory, a defensive triumph for the Allies. As his command car retreats, amidst the distant, sporadic thud of artillery, Rommel writes a passage in his diary. It is a passage that will shock later historians. It completely overturns his assessment from just one single week prior. He writes the tactical conduct of the enemy's defense was first class. They recovered from the first shock with astonishing speed. They have learned to group their reserves to defend the passes and to deploy their artillery with great skill. Between the lines there is a deep creeping chill. Rommel realized something more terrifying than defeat. The British took 2 years to learn how to fight German armor. The French never learned it. The Italians never learned it. But these Americans, they learn it in 1 week. From the slaughtered lambs of February 14th to the Iron Legion. From the slaughtered lambs to the cold-blooded Iron Legion of February 21st, only 7 days had passed. 72 hours of reorganization was enough for this army to shed its skin and be reborn. This adaptability was far more despair-inducing to Rommel than the tanks rolling out of Detroit. Industrial power determines how many weapons you have. Learning capability determines how you use them to kill. As the sunset bathes the smoking wrecks of Tebessa in blood-red light, a new era has begun. While General Patton would soon arrive with his famous discipline, the true metamorphosis didn't start with Patton. It started on that cold, rainy night with Paul Robinette. It started the moment those terrified young soldiers decided not to run. They decided to drive their tanks into the mud, dig in, and hold the line. That battle announced to the world. The sleeping giant hasn't just awakened. He has learned, with terrifying speed, the cruel art of war. For Rommel, for Hitler, and for the Third Reich, the moment the American GI learned how to fight. The outcome of World War II was already decided. A new professional army had been forged in fire. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history's deadliest miscalculations, smash the like button and subscribe. I am your strategy observer.